Hello, welcome to Life Matters. My name is Brendan O'Connell. Have you ever found it more difficult to broach the whole abortion issue with your friends and neighbors? And over the years, it's been almost 4 decades now since the Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton decision came down. And there's been a lot of hard feelings over the years when the topic is broached. And because the abortion has affected over 50 million lives that have been lost in this country. Well, today we have Olivia Gans, who's been involved in the pro-life movement for 2 or 3 decades with National Right to Life, and now she's president of the Virginia Right to Life organization. And welcome, Olivia.
Thank you so much, Brendan. I'm going to clarify quickly 2 little things.
All right.
A lot of your listeners may not know, and I know a lot of the folks in the pro-life movement may not know. I recently got married, so I'm actually Mrs. Olivia Gans Turner now.
All right.
And it's very recent. I'm only a newlywed of 2 months. And I am president of the Virginia Society for Human Life, which, yes, is the Right to Life organization here in Virginia, and we have a proud heritage, as you all do up in Massachusetts, of working on the issue.
Yes, you certainly have, and you've had a lot more success than we've had in recent times. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that. What sort of successes have you had recently?
Well, I work both in Virginia at the state organization as their president, but I'm also a member of the National Right to Life Committee staff in Washington, D.C., where I've worked since the mid-1980s. And it's true, here in Virginia, on our state level, we're very fortunate. We have a number of very strong protective laws here. We have a parental involvement law. We have a woman's right to know law. We have a partial birth abortion ban, a state version of it, and we have a prevention of physician-assisted suicide. So we're fortunate in Virginia that we have some of the strongest state laws. But this past wintertime, we were also able to pass a bill that was rather controversial. It hit the press quite a lot, but it's a very positive bill for the women of the Commonwealth of Virginia. It was an ultrasound bill that expanded on our women's right to know law, and it guarantees that women will at least be given the opportunity to view an ultrasound before they make the permanent life and death decision for their unborn child. And so we think it's a very important, positive step forward. And despite the mayhem that ensued in the national media over our good Governor McDonald's efforts to provide that protection to women in Virginia, we believe very strongly that it was a step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. And the mayhem, it's one side fighting the other, and it's often a war of words. Could you walk us through, perhaps in the past, how have things been characterized by both the pro-abortion side and the pro-life side as far as many of these issues are concerned, and how has it evolved to current day?
Well, I think we do. You bring up an excellent part of the conversation and the context of our conversation on this issue, Brendan, and that is the cultural reality of what our country is like, our society is like, because of 30 years of legalized abortion. What we're really dealing with now is not a climate anymore where it's simply significant or simple enough to just lay out the facts of fetal development for a friend or a neighbor or a coworker and have them look at us with stunned surprise and go, oh my gosh, is that what we're talking about? We now live in a society where there's been 30 years of people we love, brothers, sisters, mothers, cousins, best friends, who have actually had abortions, who have actually been involved with an abortion experience in some way. And so now you have the added ramification that you have layers of family context where people are sometimes reluctant to actually absorb the truth about who dies during an abortion because they actually know that in their own family this decision has already been made. And so it now becomes a conversation about, are you telling me that my cousin Jane is a bad person? She had an abortion when she was in college, and I love her. Are you telling me she's bad? And what we're really talking about here is a defensiveness nationally, culturally, that's become a part of our conversation. And so when we as pro-lifers attempt to discuss these issues, whether it's in the legislative forum or at church or at Thanksgiving dinner with the family, it becomes even more intense because of these layers of silence and secrecy that sometimes surround these private decisions that has now means that virtually every family in America has been affected and changed by the legalization of abortion. In some way, all of our lives have been affected by this.
Well, then how would one broach the issue, say at the dining room table with family and friends?
I think the main context here is to always remain authentic. In my experience, as I say, I work at the National Right to Life level, and in that position, I've spoken in all 50 states and in 17 countries abroad, and I've done a great deal of media along with those public appearances. And what I've learned over the years is the greatest response I get, particularly from young people, university-age people, is remaining authentic, remaining true to what I know is factual and real in this discussion is a very powerful component. But doing so with compassion, doing so with a gracious attitude, an attitude that says, I respect your life and your understanding of this situation as much as I respect the babies whose lives I'm trying to save. Because I don't know where this person has been. I don't know that backstory. So I have to indicate with my mannerisms and the language that I use and the way that I approach the issue that I love and respect the individual I'm talking to, and I'm working to protect and defend their life as much as the baby who lives unseen in the womb. Both of their lives are of value to me. And when I as a speaker can register that I respect the person I'm talking to, and I'm listening to what they're saying, and it matters to me to hear what their fears are or their disagreement is with me, then the conversation can really continue.
And for instance, let me give you an example of a common one I hear. It's, it's kind of, I would say the overture is butt out. And it's, that's between a woman and her doctor. The decision is between a woman and her doctor. How does one counter that if you're coming from the angle, the authenticity angle that you're talking about?
Well, I always acknowledge that many people understand the issue that way, that's how they see this debate. But when we talk about this issue, we must not forget the decision that she is making is a decision for someone else's life. A child who at 18 days to 20 days after conception has a beating heart, who at 6 weeks has brainwaves, that this little baby girl or baby boy has fingers and toes with indelible fingerprints already in place at 9 to 10 weeks of pregnancy, which is about the time most abortions are performed. So the baby already has a beating heart, brainwaves, and permanent personal identifying marks like fingerprints. This is someone, not something that we're talking about. And so the discussion is always about how to provide for this woman and her right to dignity and opportunity while recognizing her child's right to be protected under the law. So it's important to draw people's attention to the biological reality of the situation while acknowledging that we understand that women are often frightened, overwhelmed, and sometimes under a great deal of duress and pressure to think that the smart thing to do is have an abortion. But ultimately, that decision ends one person's life and doesn't leave that woman with the answers she's looking for. It sends her back to the same scenario of hopelessness that made it seem realistic to have an abortion in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And what about and this you get from a lot of the hardcore feminists, they say, it's my body. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that all these conversations, as I pointed out in lectures that I think you may have actually heard, Brendan, it's something very important to me to explain to people that sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen to the people talking to you. And when you keep hearing the same themes, that it's a woman's body, it's my choice, it's my right, it's between me and my doctor, those are essentially all the same questions or the same challenges, just being put together a little differently with a little bit of a different spin each time. And so essentially you're still dealing with people who don't either want to get it or can't get it. Sometimes when I hear somebody who very dogmatically keeps insisting, but it's a woman's decision, it's her body, I sometimes have to step back, and I advise people to do this. When you run into that kind of brick wall, think for a moment. This could very well be someone who has personally had an abortion. That kind of resistance to the medical realities of what the baby looks like and is like in the womb, or the phenomenon that our society can do better than telling poor women the best answer to a poor baby's birth is to kill that child before they're born. when you see that kind of resistance, you're often talking to somebody who actually may have had an abortion. So sometimes it isn't worth arguing over. Sometimes the thing to do is go, I hear where you're coming from, but may I ask you to please continue to look at the science of this, to realize that if we are concerned about a woman's body and her health and her well-being, it is not in her interest to have an abortion. Abortion has multiple medical risks and complications attached, not the least of which is the risk of subsequent breast cancer, a much higher risk of breast cancer if she has an abortion than if she has the baby. If we want to protect a woman's health and a woman's body, abortion is not the way to do that. So sometimes when people talk to me incessantly about a woman's body and a woman's right, I stop talking about the baby and I start talking about, well, you're right. It is about women. Let's talk about how abortion is hurting women, not helping them. And so if you turn the argument in another direction that they're not expecting, you sometimes have an idea that this person is willing to listen to me, maybe I should listen to them. And so your listener realizes that you're hearing their concern, whatever it may be. So it's about recognizing that our culture has been damaged, that you're often talking to somebody who's actually had an abortion or knows someone that they love who's had an abortion, and who's looking for answers to either make that make sense or they're afraid to actually get close to the truth of what may have happened. So it puts up barriers to our conversation. So breaking through by listening is the first step.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've come to realize doing this show is that I've had Dr. David Reardon on of the Unchoice. I don't know if you know that website.
I know Dr. Reardon very well. We have known each other for many years. Yes.
And basically, they've been compiling statistics over the years, and he feels that of the number of abortions that occur out there, about 64% of abortions are coerced. Is that a statistic that you should bring up in a discussion with someone who is, say, more stridently, or just they're maybe amorphously pro-choice because they think that's what the culture is?
I think it's always very good to point out the mythology behind the slogans of safe and legal abortion, that women are making these decisions independently. I happen to be a woman who had an abortion back in 1981, so I'm very, very sympathetic and extremely empathetic to the dynamics that are going on when women face a difficult pregnancy. I've been there, done that, as they say. And so my heart always goes out to individuals who may have walked the same walk I did. And I think Dr. Reardon's assessment is not at all far off. The Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood, has indicated in its own version of their research that we understand women are coerced, that women do feel very much like the only option they have when they're faced with a difficult pregnancy sometimes is to have an abortion. And we understand that the single most powerful factor in whether or not a woman will get an abortion is not her point of view, but actually the baby's father's attitude. So if her boyfriend or husband or individual who's involved in who fathered this baby has a negative attitude towards the pregnancy, overwhelmingly, the majority of the time, over 80% of the time, the baby will most certainly die. There will be an abortion. Because women turn to the fathers of their children for support, help, and guidance. And if the father of that baby, before the baby is born, rejects the child, then women feel abandoned and often feel that the only thing they can do is have an abortion because he's not there to support her. So it is important to talk to people about the realities behind these slogans that the media has crafted and make it clear that abortion is not to women's advantage, that it very often is to the advantage of an unscrupulous boyfriend or an unhappy parent who's angry that their daughter got pregnant. These are the realities that women are facing, and it's important to make people comprehend that this is not just a debate about slogans. These are real people's lives that hang in the balance.
Mm-hmm. And, how are issues, how have they changed over the years as far as, for instance, I know that way back when they used to coerce people by saying, it's just a blob of tissue. How have things changed as you've seen it? Maybe 2 or 3 examples.
Well, they definitely still want to maintain the mythology that there's not a real baby there. That's why they fight the new ultrasound bills, because when they know that when women see an image of their baby on an ultrasound screen, most of the time, or many times, women will say, "No, I don't want to have an abortion. That's the baby there. I can see the baby's fingers and toes. That's my child's heart that's beating," and so they walk away from the abortionist table. But so the abortionists know that when you show women factual information about their unborn child, they usually will turn away. Unless they're being coerced by someone else, they will reject the abortion. So they fight very hard to keep the mythology that there's nothing there, that no one in particular is there. They want the baby to be a thing, not a little girl or a little boy waiting to be loved by their mother or father. And so it's very important that we restore the humanity of the baby by not calling unborn children it, by remembering that each one of us was either a he or a she before we were born, and recognizing that it's our job as pro-lifers to always refer to the baby as someone, not something. And so it's very important that we do that, because that's still a part of the discussion. The current problems that we see is unfortunately somewhat of a hardening of the heart of the younger generation. There is a double whammy going on. The under 25-year-olds in America are the largest self-identifying pro-life group in America when asked in polls. But interestingly enough, they are also sometimes, the young people under the age of 25 are sometimes very almost cold about the discussion of abortion, because they are actually our children. I am a woman of a certain age, and my child would be a young adult now. And so my generation are the parents of the younger generation that is currently coming of age. And it's true that they've grown up in homes where there is a sense of alienation, a brokenness in the connectedness to their parents, sometimes because of an unresolved abortion in the past, the mother or the father. And those things are having an impact on how the younger generation receives the knowledge of the truth behind abortion. It either turns them very solidly pro-life, which is why we do have a large propensity of under 25-year-olds who identify themselves as pro-life, but it also has a tendency to make some people in their young adult years quite callous about the issue, because they don't know how to cope with it. They know that there's a dead sibling in their family, and they don't know how to make sense of it. So there's a mixture of how the effect of 30 years of abortion has affected the way people approach this issue. They're either hot or cold on it. There doesn't seem to be a lot of middle in the younger generation. There still is a lot of mushy middle, if you will, in older people. They are still easily convinced by the facts when you present them. So it's going to be interesting to see how we develop tools to effectively reach the generation behind our own who has been so damaged by the culture of abortion. It's truly left an indelible mark on their lives.
Mm-hmm. And what about, I've seen studies that regarding age brackets, that people are pro-life when they're younger, but then they get into college and they start having extramarital sex, or in their 20s, and they become much more pro-abortion, because they're now faced with the reality of having had sex and conceiving a child. Is that less a factor today than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago?
I can't speak to what you've seen in those studies, because I have not seen those particular studies. My overwhelming experience of the data is that, as a rule, young people in their college-age years are actually identifying very strongly with the pro-life issue, and they don't seem to be fluctuating from that. I suppose it's very possible that an individual who was somewhat ambivalent on the issue could find themselves leaning towards a pro-abortion point of view. It doesn't seem to be our experience in the studies that we've seen that once a person truly comprehends the pro-life issue, that they switch away from it. But it is true that life takes funny turns, and one can never know where another person is walking or what influences they're encountering. So I think that, again, takes us back to what I said earlier. Because you don't know where a person you're talking to has been in their life or what their personal experiences are, one always has to be very, very careful about being overly dogmatic with the issue. Never run away from the facts, never run away from the truth about the reality of what is involved in abortion, but always be prepared to listen to your audience. Listen to the individuals you're talking to. You sometimes hear people might be willing to think, well, no, abortion isn't good after the third trimester, after the third month of pregnancy. No late abortion. Abortion should never occur in the later periods of pregnancy. But maybe abortion should be legal if the baby is going to be severely disabled. And sometimes when you scratch the surface of that conversation, you discover that the person you're talking to is actually quite frightened or overwhelmed about what they would do if they were told they were having a baby with a severe disability. They don't know if they could cope with it. So they're not necessarily in favor of abortion, but they're frightened of what they could cope with. How would they handle it? Or maybe they know a loved one who's had to face that. And so when you sometimes ask more questions than you answer during the course of a conversation, you learn what you should be responding to. Is it just a matter of putting out the facts of what the law is, that abortion is illegal in America? In all 50, well, not in all, in all but 7 states, abortion is still legal through all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason whatsoever. In 7 states, it is now the law that no abortion can be performed after the point in pregnancy when an unborn child can feel pain. And that's approximately 20 weeks that we can verify. So that's rather exciting that those 7 states have those laws. But people don't know what the laws are. So sometimes it's a question of giving the facts, just putting the facts on the table. Sometimes you have to scratch the surface and find out, does this person just want me to give them a litany of facts and figures? Or do they need to hear me talk to them compassionately about the help that the pro-life movement provides to families who are faced with something frightening, like a disabled child, or rape and incest, or perhaps a mother who will be facing serious health challenges, medical challenges, if she carries the pregnancy? Those are valid concerns. We have better answers than abortion for those people. We have much better answers. But we have to listen to the people we're talking to, ask them questions, find out what their real concerns are, and then allow the conversation to unfold. If I care about the people I want to save in the womb, then I have to care about the people I'm talking to with equal urgency and equal respect.
And what about, I know when I went to your presentation, you had categorized arguments by the other side into five areas. And the question always comes up, particularly with politicians, I'm pro-life except for rape, incest, and the health of the mother, which I always feel the health of the mother you can drive a Mack truck through.
Well, life of the mother, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
life
exactly.
of the mother, pardon. Well,
yeah.
They try to say health, I think, too.
Yes, they do.
How do you overcome, or how do you deal with that particular argument?
Well, Brendan, I think you brought up one of the potentially red herring arguments. For one thing, most folks don't know that less than 4% of abortions are happening in America for those hard cases, those very frightening, overwhelming situations that many people legitimately have emotional distress over. And they are worried, well, what if my daughter was in this situation? Or what if my best friend was in this situation? Or what if my sister was in this situation? And there's a great anxiety about that. But what they don't understand is that those situations are profoundly rare. They're extremely rare. And they are even rarer as reasons for abortion. And so one of the things to try to find out is if this person is legitimately afraid of something like that, talk them through, is it really helpful to a mother to put her through the medically risky procedure of abortion because her baby might be born with a disease or disability? No, it's actually quite cruel to the mother to put her through a medical, surgical, or chemical with RU46, either a chemical abortion or a surgical abortion that's fraught with actual physical risk to her well-being, which could impair her ability to have future children, all because we're not sure we're ready to help her cope with, or her family cope with, the birth of a child who will have a severe disability. And when it comes to questions like rape and incest, are we really doing this young woman a kindness when we put her through what is actually, in my experience as a woman who's had an abortion, a very violent and painful and potentially risky medical procedure? The abortion procedure remains just as risky for a woman who's been through a rape or an incest situation as it is for any other woman. And yet, because we're frightened of the circumstances under which this baby was conceived, sometimes we tend to say, well, maybe you ought to go ahead and have an abortion, forgetting that we're putting her at great risk for her future health and well-being, both physically and psychologically. And so we don't do these mothers any assistance when we put them in harm's way, because we as a society or as a family or as a couple aren't ready to cope with the rest of the dynamics of that complex situation. And as far as life for the mother goes, the National Right to Life Committee, of which Virginia Society for Human Life is part, we've always had a position that when a mother's life is imminently threatened with death, the physician in question must make emergency medical decisions, and that those decisions might mean that the baby will die. But in our society today, with medical advances that we have, there are truly very, very few, approximately only 3 or 4 legitimate life-threatening situations through which a woman could not successfully have her pregnancy carry on. And many people don't know that. It's in less than 1% of abortions are done for life of the mother's situation.
Wow. Well, that's very interesting, Olivia. Well, our time, unfortunately, has come to an end, because it's very informative, and very appreciative that you're able to come on today and be with us here in Boston and Massachusetts, and I look forward to seeing you again at the convention next year or some other time.
Well, listen, Brenda, the next time I want to come up to Boston. I haven't been to Boston in a long time. It's a beautiful city, and sometime I'd love to be up there and do something with you in studio. That would be a great joy.
That'd be terrific. Well, thank you so much. And just one final thing. What website is it that they could
Well,
visit?
I would recommend that folks go to www.nrlc.org. nrlc.org is a great resource. I also recommend stoptheabortionagenda.com. Stoptheabortionagenda.com is an excellent resource on current issues and what's being done federally and other issues that might be helpful to folks as they frame their own information and get their head around these complex questions. And I wish everybody well. And the most important thing to remember is don't miss an opportunity to talk to somebody because you don't think you know all the answers. You can always tell people you'll go look it up for them, but always with a smile on your face and with compassion in your heart, engage people in this conversation.
Thank you so much, Olivia. Well, we hope you found today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.